The London Fire Brigade are dealing with a huge fire in a residential tower block in West London.
On the early morning of June 14th, 2017, a devastating fire at London's Grenfell Tower led to the worst housing disaster in post-war Britain. The inferno took the lives of 72 people, including 18 children. Since then, a public inquiry has exposed the culprits, yet none have been brought to trial. This is the story of the Grenfell community and their struggle for justice.
You are somebody who is from a lot sunnier climes than the UK, but you have lived in West London for a long, long time. How did you become involved in Justice for Grenfell?
I became involved in Justice for Grenfell because, obviously, I live 300 meters from the tower. I saw the fire on the night, and I'd been active in the community before the fire, actually fighting against gentrification, fighting against a whole range of stuff that the borough had been doing. And I was so enraged after the fire that I organized a demonstration. And following that demonstration, I was invited to speak at the first silent march. And when I was invited to speak, I think it was at that point I met Yvette and Ishmael, and I thought I actually want to be part of a campaign that fights for justice.
You mentioned a little about some of the work you were doing before the fire. So you were very active within community organization.
So I was part of Westway 23, which was actually fighting for some of the resources under the Westway, which was bequeathed to the community, but it was being taken away.
Right.
The story of Westway marks an important development in the relationship between the planners and the people who often suffer the effects of their planning. Construction started in 1966. Since then, the local residents have had to put up with pile drivers and bulldozers.
The Westway motorway is believed to lower the life expectancy of people that live next to it by about 5%. And so as part of the way of compensating the local community, it was promised that the acres underneath the Westway, they would be a public asset rather than a private asset. But of course, we have seen over the decades since the building of the Westway that those spaces have been given to private companies by the council. And of course, Grenfell Action Group, an organization set up by Edward Darfan and other colleagues who were aiming to not only put in freedom of information requests, but constantly hold the council accountable for their neglect in dealing with the issues that people had in the building. They set up a blog because they found that this was the best way to expose the way they were being treated.
Primarily, to begin with, the blog, we felt, gave the community on Lanc West a voice to deal with what was going on in the Kensington Aldridge Leisure Centre project. And, you know, it was a massive impact on our community. It took up all our residential space. It was going to, you know, impact our lives, and as kind of having a massive building site in your backyard for 2 years. When the CALT project started in January 2013, there was an increase in cars and service vehicles parked in the emergency bays at the base of the tower. The real kind of catalyst for things going kind of in a downward direction was the power surges that occurred in May 2013. And, you know, that was a big wake-up call for myself, and I think for many residents above the 10th floor that were affected by what happened then.
They have since been credited as being predictors of the fire, because in 2016 they put a post, November 2016, saying it will take a great disaster to expose the ineptitude and incompetence of the council and the KCTMO, the landlord of the building. And they were vindicated, unfortunately. The most tragic of vindications possible.
There was a thought, I think, that maybe housing could be transferred to housing associations. And I think in Kensington and Chelsea, the view of the tenants was they did not wish to transfer to a housing association. They would rather manage their own stock, and that was an option. So actually, I think we became the first tenant management organisation in the country to cover the whole of the borough.
Do you have any specific professional qualifications?
No.
Did you have any training on fire risk systems or fire risk management systems when you arrived and took up the job of CEO?
No.
No. Can you account for having a head of health and safety, in effect, who had no health and safety background?
Because I appointed her.
How did the TMO ensure that it did appoint the right contractors when it came to fire safety specifically?
Fire brigade were not able to get access to the plan of the building until almost 7 a.m. that day. It took about half an hour to send it. So, you know, the ineptitude of the landlords has been partly revealed as well.
Did it not occur to you that it was important for the residents of Grenfell Tower to know that one of the major active fire prevention mechanisms in the building wasn't working?
I think as I sit here now, again, hindsight is a great thing. It is something that we could have told people about.
Thanks, Claire. Let's hope our luck holds and there are no fires in the meantime. I mean, did you think at the time that hoping your luck would hold, a sort of fingers crossed attitude, was really an appropriate way of discharging your health and safety functions?
As I say, I didn't think of it in those terms, but I appreciate it is a health and safety issue, which is why both of us were trying to keep it moving forward.
We know that the smoke extraction system was only replaced in 2016 as part of the refurbishment programme, wasn't it?
Yes.
Do you agree with me that that meant that Grenfell Tower did not have a fully functioning AOV system between 2010 and 2016?
Based on what you're telling me, yes.
Despite the fact that the GTLA had raised this very problem after the April 2010 fire?
I accept that.
When I say abuse, that's what it felt like living under the TMO. Every single word, when I describe the TMO as like a mini mafia, non-functioning organisation, they're not glib, you know, shoot from the hip expressions. You know, I spent like a long, long time thinking how to describe this organisation. That is the closest description I can come.
And it seemed to me the happy idea in the 1990s that you might devolve power hasn't really meant that. It really has meant that councils should be running housing directly.
The regeneration, the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower, it was part of a much bigger project called the Local Plan, set about to build thousands of new homes. But those homes, it was clear, if we looked at the precedents that had taken place in the area and outside of the area prior to the local plan would not be recreating the existing demographics of the neighbourhood.
There are, as far as we know, at least 80 estates in London where large-scale redevelopment and demolition is being planned. And I think we all know what that is about, that they want the land, they want to intensify development, they can sell places for £500,000 each, and up to 80% market rent, which in London that means a rent you can't afford, basically. Only on a council estate where you've got the right to have council housing, council leaseholders, freeholders, and the mix that you've got now, you can't reproduce that on a private development.
I think high-rise buildings are not always the happiest places to live. You can be very lonely, very isolated. I don't think necessarily they're the best way forward for the future.
Is it right that from 2009 you were, and I think remain, the director of a company called Socially Conscious Capital Limited?
That's correct.
Is that a property development and investment company?
It is in the property industry. It is what they call a strategic land promoter, whereby we seek to get planning permission on greenfield sites around towns and villages in the UK.
So you're involved, and have been since that time involved in major regeneration, or perhaps minor regeneration projects?
It's all to do with the planning. We don't do any building work, just getting the planning permissions.
And is that specifically in social housing, or?
No, it's mainly residential, but mixed tenure.
The stimulation of the market would mean that you would want to replace this area with properties worth a lot more money. It would make sense from almost every part of the equation, apart from the interests of the people who lived in the area.
The council will seek to negotiate a right to return for as many affected eligible residents as possible. This cannot be guaranteed and will depend on the particular circumstances of each individual regeneration scheme using this policy. That's not a guaranteed right of return, it's a qualified right of return, isn't it?
Yeah, something appears to have been inserted to make this less robust than the politicians would have intended. I don't quite know how that got in there, but it's certainly not our view. Our view was that the right to return was unconditional.
Right. Well, looking at it now, do you accept that Mr. Devine might have had a point about?
He might have had a point.
And by a really cruel twist of fate, we were organising the Save Our Silchester campaign when the refurbishment of Grenfell was finished. And we were saying to each other, and residents of Grenfell Tower, you're the only ones who are safe now, because your tower is not going to be demolished. It's just had this, refurbishment. It was worth around £10 million. The rest of our blocks are still under the hammer and due to be demolished. And in fact, it took the Grenfell fire for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to back off and say, we are not going to knock down the rest of your blocks now. We're going to back off, but that's for the time being. That's because the community has a level of visibility which would make, frankly, this type of dictatorial policy untenable and impossible.
I grew up in council housing, and I've seen its demise since the 1980s when Right to Buy was brought in. There's been deregulation in the sector. There's a lack of investment going into council housing. So I think that there are wider issues here through successive governments, Tory, Labour and the coalition. Council housing is a really important community asset that should be valued.
Between 2012 and 2016, the TMO commissioned a major refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. I refer to this as the primary refurbishment. Adaptation of 2 lifts to include 2 new doors, recladding of the facade.
Grenfell Tower hadn't had serious capital investment for many, many years, that there were all sorts of problems with the windows, the communal heating, and Laura Johnson's reassurance to me was that the investment in refurbishing Grenfell Tower would not necessarily preclude the possibility of a wider estate regeneration if the council one day wanted to do that in the future.
Initially, they put out a press release saying Leadbitter was the main contractor on it, and it was going to cost about 11.3 million. That was believed to be about 1.6 million pounds over the budget that the council had set aside. And so the project was put out to tender. At this point, the construction company Ryden took it for 8.7 million.
What we wanted was an understanding.
What you wanted was a secret understanding that was not discoverable by anybody else, least of all the other bidders.
I agree that there wasn't full transparency because there had been an offline meeting to overcome a problem.
And in saying that the process was conducted under the transparency of the public procurement exercise, that is OJEU, is utterly misleading because it was no such thing.
I disagree.
I think what I was interested by and pleased by was the thought of putting thermally insulating cladding around the building. I'd seen lots of other buildings all over London and other parts of the country where they had been refurbished and cladding had gone up on the outside, and people had said that, you know, they're now much more thermally efficient, energy efficient. I'd been the cabinet member for the environment. We were trying to cut our carbon emissions, so it seemed to me that cladding had all sorts of positive, sadly positive purposes.
Rockfielding Mellon and a French company that was helping him with the project managing was a company called Artelia. They set about trying to find an alternative to this zinc fire-resistant cladding. What they came up with was the Arconic PE Renabond cladding, which meant that the council saved £293,000, £365. So for about £300,000, they used instead, to save that amount of money, they used instead PE Renabond Arconic cladding, which has 6 millimeters of polyethylene in the middle of it.
Various cladding options have been shown to residents, with the composite zinc cladding system being favoured by the majority. Was the change from zinc to aluminium clearly signalled to the residents?
Not by myself, no.
By anybody else?
I don't know, I suspect not.
Did you ever give the residents a specific opportunity, directed to them and for their own benefit, to study the options for cladding being discussed with the planners in the summer of 2014?
No, we didn't.
Why is that?
Because the planners would be the people who made the ultimate decision. That would be sort of trying to consult with them on something that we had no sway over.
Although it may very well be the case that the planners would have the ultimate decision over the colour, the planners didn't have the ultimate decision over whether it should be zinc as opposed to ACM, which was a TMO decision, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and that decision was something that, do you accept, should have been the focus of consultation and engagement with the residents so that they could understand the reason for the change.
Yes, I think perhaps that the change of personnel between Paul Dunkerton and what he presented and where I'm coming from a starting point meant that there was a gap there.
It was not something which I knew much about. Aluminium and zinc, as far as I know, are two different metals. I didn't know about the different potential properties of those two metals, and it wasn't a question that would have sprung to mind.
When you received this email, did you open the attachments?
I do remember having seen these and skimming them.
Did you forward these on to any other councillors, do you think?
I don't remember doing so.
Did the receipt of these guides lead you to consider the safety of the cladding that was then under discussion for Grenfell Tower?
It did not.
Simon, I'm just writing to get clarification on the fire retardance of the new cladding. I just had a Lacknell moment. What did you understand, Claire Williams, to mean by a Lacknell moment?
I'd heard that there was a fire at Lacknell some years before, but I didn't know the specific details.
Did you respond?
We can't find any record of it. So
No. Why, on the basis that there isn't any record of a response by you, why is there no record of any response by you to her Lacknell moment question?
I don't know. I would have assumed that I would have taken that email because I wouldn't have answered it directly, and I would have passed that to probably Harley's.
So you say you would have sent it to Harley. We find no record of you passing it on to Harley to saying, please help me advise my client. Can you explain that?
No.
Right. These are new documents. These aren't repeats of documents you'd seen before.
Not that I remember, no.
And were you aware of, at the time, of a fire in South London which had happened in July 2009 at Lacknell House in Southwark?
Yes, I think I had heard of it.
Yes. And had you read the coroner's recommendations, do you think, at any stage before July 2014?
Not that I remember.
Did you read that?
I probably did at the time, yes.
Did you understand it?
I understood it, and I would have assumed from what it said there that the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, and you mentioned earlier Laura Johnson passing this to the chairman, that would feature in their scrutiny of the TMO and the premises, TMO premises in general.
Yes. By making that assumption, were you not doing exactly what the LFB was advising you not to do?
Possibly.
You say that the 106 doors were not tested for 30 minutes integrity from both sides of the door and therefore were not compliant, is that correct?
Yeah. So total failure of the door.
Yeah.
I think that's very important, particularly for people who are waiting in flats.
So the left here is the level 2 switch with the faceplate removed where they found the wires were not connected, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you think it signifies a potential maintenance failure?
There is a duty to test those switches, a duty to understand if they're connected or not. And so, yes, there is a duty to maintain life safety equipment at all times in any building.
Why not send this directly to those councillors who are more directly responsible for refurbishment works?
Perhaps I should have done that. It could have gone the other way, but I think then everybody would have said, "Oh, it's about Grenfell, and we've got, the fire safety at Grenfell is being considered by the fire safety consultants."
Did you visit Grenfell Tower at any stage during the time you worked on the project?
No, I didn't.
Can you explain why that was?
Other priorities, possibly?
Did you not think that it would be essential in order to carry out your role as the lead member of Exover's fire safety engineering team that you visited the building?
It would have been desirable, but I didn't do it.
Did you have any understanding of what polyethylene was?
No.
No?
No.
Therefore, you didn't understand that it was a plastic?
No.
Does that tell us that you knew nothing of the fire performance of the polyethylene core of these ACM panels being proposed for the building?
No.
I observed some required cavity barriers not to have been installed at Grenfell Tower. This image illustrates the cavity barriers present in the external wall cavity. It can be seen there are no cavity barrier products installed around the openings made by the windows. No cavity barriers were specified at the head of the external wall cavity, up by the so-called crown.
It frequently falls to the last link in the chain, the building control surveyor, to spot the problem. I'm bound to put it to you, Mr. Hope, that failure fell below the standards of a reasonably competent building control inspector. Do you accept that?
As I say, in hindsight, yes, but I didn't see it as an issue at the time.
Do you recall whether there would be any reason why Mr. Hoban would not feel able to raise his concerns?
I would say not.
Were you aware of a culture within the department that made it difficult?
Certainly not. In the wider department, it was probably one of the greatest group of people I know. It wasn't a culture you would say would be bullying at all.
I resigned because I had enough. I wasn't able to do the job that how I was trained to do, and it was affecting my health, and I just decided that I didn't want to work there anymore. I am truly heartbroken about what happened that night, particularly for those who lost their lives. You know, the children, the brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, fathers, mothers. I just want to say that I'm truly heartbroken for them.
I was very proud to be leader of Kensington and Chelsea. I'm desperately sorry for everybody who was in the tower on the morning of the 14th of June. I will never forget what I saw. It was utterly, utterly terrible. The memorial to those who lost their lives and lost everything and have had their lives ruined must be that the work that this inquiry is doing to find out what really happened can never happen again, and that must be the memorial to those that lost their lives, and I'm so sorry for all of them.
The sorrow and the pain that I have experienced over the last 4 years is nothing compared to what must be unbearable grief that those who lost their loved ones have had to suffer, and indeed all those who had their lives shattered on that night. And to those people, I want to say how very sorry I am.
Whose role was it at RBKC to monitor or scrutinise the adequacy of provision for evacuation of vulnerable and disabled in the event of a fire?
It was no one's specific responsibility.
Did anyone in your team take proactive steps to satisfy themselves or to assess the adequacy of the provision to meet the needs of the disabled and vulnerable residents in the event of a fire?
No.
Were you aware that the TMO had not produced personal emergency evacuation plans in respect of any resident of Grenfell Tower as at the date of the fire?
I was not aware.
I fell down twice.
You fell down?
Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that.
When it came to rescue not being possible and self-evacuation was the only means to leave the tower, that left that category of person in a very hazardous condition, and there is no statutory duty at this time to provide such means. I find that very concerning.
The cladding used at Grenfell Tower had a dangerously flammable polyethylene core. Known by its acronym ACM, the product had already been linked to a number of building disasters worldwide. In Australia, a Senate inquiry into this fire revealed thousands of buildings across the nation wrapped in the dangerous material. ACM said the report was not compliant with the National Building Code, a policy of deregulation pursued by successive governments had enabled widespread corruption within Australia's building industry.
The committee believes that
As there are safe, non-flammable and fire-retardant alternatives available, there is no place for PE core ACPs in the Australian market. Implement a total ban on the importation, sale and use of PE core ACPs as a matter of urgency.
After this fire killed 50, the British Parliament passed the so-called Summerland Amendments. From now on, every external wall of a high-rise building in the UK had to be fire-resistant. But the new law was short-lived.
In 1984, the Thatcher government passed something called the Building Regulations Act. Michael Heseltine was in charge of it, and he said it will allow greater industry self-regulation. And so that was the taking of 320 or so pages of building regulations and replacing them with about 24 pages of building regulations. Rather than being prescriptive, those building regulations are performance-based. Is saying as long as fire doesn't spread in this way, as long as fire doesn't behave in this way, it can contain whatever you want it to contain. Whereas prescriptive would have said it cannot contain polyethylene, right? Which is really basic, that's elementary. But as Michael Heseltine said and set into action, he said it will allow greater industry self-regulation.
In 1991, disaster was only narrowly averted after Liverpool's Knowsley Heights became the first UK tower block to be wrapped in flammable cladding. After a similar fire in Scotland 8 years later, a public review recommended a comprehensive ban on the material for all UK high-rises.
And then there was approved document B, which is basically the explanation of how building regulations should be applied. It was rejigged by John Prescott. It's believed that that space that was created in that rejigging gave a lot of creative ambiguity to companies in the way in which they can choose to interpret and apply building regulations.
It's my understanding that in our regulatory system in the United Kingdom that anyone can do anything they want. There is no requirement for anyone to follow any particular rules ever under any circumstances. There was only a justification that's based around the idea that market disruption should be avoided to the extent possible.
Sarah walked into the office and showed me a small piece of material which I now know to be ACM.
Right.
And said, look at this stuff. We just did a Fire Note 9 test on it.
Did she tell you that the test had to be terminated manually before 6 minutes?
If she did, I don't remember that.
Right. Did she tell you that the flames had not only reached the top of the rig, but had doubled it and gone up to 20 metres in height?
I don't remember that.
Given the fact that not publishing it was unusual, was there a cover-up?
No, there was not, sir.
How do you know?
But from my perspective, sat here today, there was no cover-up from my perspective.
Right. See, some people looking at this might think that the test results showing that ACM panels with a Class 0 badge performing disastrously at height was covered up and the government let them be used at height for another 17 years. What would you say to them?
I can see how that might appear and why people might think that. I can only provide you with my assurance that that is not what happened from my perspective.
Mr. Martin, are you able to give us an assurance that you and Anthony Bird did not sit on this data or your knowledge of it for the full 9 years that you were a full-time civil servant, hoping and praying fervently that it would never see the light of day?
I can assure you that neither of us would have done that.
Is there any innocent explanation for why this data was sat on between September 2002 and disclosure to the inquiry for phase 2?
Tragically, I think it just got forgotten and fell between the gaps.
How could it possibly have been forgotten given what it showed?
I've been asking myself that question for quite some time.
Fire brigade. Yeah, hello, hi. In the fire, flat 16 Grenfell Tower. Sorry, a fire where? Flat 16 Grenfell Tower. We're in the floor.
Mate, honestly, I don't...
23rd, that's 2-1, over.
Well, it's towering inferno, isn't it?
How is that possible?
It's jumped up all the way along the flats. Look.
All the debris is falling on the floor, catching fire.
Set the whole block on fire so quick. Went through the kitchen window and then it started spreading up across the cladding, falling off the block. That was on fire. People screaming. See, people were still sleeping on the higher floors, so they didn't have a clue what was going on. I'm not even sure if half of them got out, to be honest with you.
Anybody who you're speaking to in the building, they need to ring 999. There is a dedicated line for this incident, okay? Thank you.
We saw people looking out the window screaming help, help, flashing their lights and everything. And now all those windows, people are gone, literally gone.
I heard something, I looked up and I could see someone coming out the window. Next moment, they're on the floor, flat.
Oh my God, they're screaming! Oh my God!
What has happened? Who's missing?
My friend and her 2 little girls.
And what's your friend's name?
Rania Ibrahim.
And she's a 30-year-old mum with 2 small children. What floor has she been on?
23rd floor.
Right. And you've been able to not contact her. She's made no contact with you.
No.
What was the last you heard of her?
I just saw her snap chat saying that the whole building is burning, and then she's saying goodbye to everyone.
It was my son that woke me up. I'd say it was meant to be about 20 past 1.
And where were you in the building?
17th floor.
17th floor.
Just grabbed them, we just ran down the stairs. It took us a good solid maybe 4 minutes to get out.
You've got family who were on the 18th floor?
Yeah.
And you spoke to them last night?
Yeah.
And they were saying what?
Smoke. It can't get out because of smoke. So I suspect, I don't know for what I would if I was him, he just stayed in the room, hoping that the fire brigade would get up there.
Because that's what they're told to do, isn't it? They're told to stay in the flat.
Yeah. So we would have stayed in there, waited and followed the instructions. There's nothing else you can do from the 18th floor, because we can't fly.
The one image which sticks in my mind was seeing a family waving what appeared to be a towel for around an hour, and there was a helicopter coming about 400 meters from their window and then turning around. And for me, the thing that I took from this was how agonizing must that have been for that family when they were, we watched them stop moving from the street.
In my 29 years in the London Fire Brigade, I have never seen a fire of this nature, and I have seen many high-rise fires. This will, of course, be subject to a major investigation, but at this moment in time, we do not wish to speculate further about the cause of the fire or the fire spread. That is something that will be closely looked at in the very near future.
We've had a brilliant response from our local community, and they've been phenomenal in terms of giving money, donations, even poor people who haven't got, they're giving the shirts off their backs, literally. And even little kids donating their toys. And it's just been emotional. I have people from Japan come in and want to help. People from Scotland, Wales. And it's just heartwarming that they've got this empathy and compassion.
Doesn't matter, does it? North, east, south or west, you're a Londoner.
We're Londoners,
Everybody's
man.
a Londoner, so...
We got to help each other, you know what I mean, mate?
I've been here already all morning, lots of us. I've got older clothes for older people this time, handbags and shoes. This morning, thank you, darling. This morning it was kids' clothes. I think everybody around. I've seen loads of locals coming down.
The Al-Manar Mosque counts many Grenfell House residents among its worshippers. Today they were sorting clothes and cooking food for those breaking fast tonight or in need after the longest of days.
We were humbled as a community because the whole of London came out to support us. Actually, the country came out to support us. And communities of all different faiths, no faiths, provided food, water, clothing, all sorts of things. And in particular, I think our community are really grateful to the Muslim community because it was the middle of Ramadan and they provided food for people day in and day out as they broke their fast with us. And a lot of us believe that if it wasn't Ramadan, more people would have died in that fire because a lot of people were up because of Ramadan.
You decided to come all the way across London to help people out, presumably you've never met.
To be honest, it's Ramadan right now, so it's like the month of giving to people and stuff. And since now this happened, so I thought it was like a good thing to do to help people out, basically.
What's in your bag? Do you mind us having a quick look?
They told us just to label it. I've got baby and toddlers' clothes. I've got some towels and baby grows and things like that. And
star doodles to fly.
And did this stuff belong to?
Yeah, it was all Junior's stuff. Yeah, Stella's things and her older brothers and sisters. So it's a good time to get it out, isn't it? Really today.
I could have been them. Could have been me. Could have been any of us. But I think it's, my sense was we're Londoners. We help one another out.
We suddenly turned around and said, sorry, where is our council? Don't we actually have a council here? Where are they? But we realised that this was the self-same council that had been inflicting cut after cut, starvation of services, starvation of amenities.
Their spending on planning had fallen by 81%. They'd cut the housing budget in the area by 76%. They'd cut regulatory services and functions of the council by 22% and had an overall spending reduction of 36%.
And therefore, the contempt, the arrogance was just a continuation of what they'd done to us before.
We always pay our rent, and if you didn't pay your rent, they will come and you will get letters, you will get phone calls. But, on the day of when it happened, no one has turned up. So where is the duty of care?
I don't know if everyone realised how complex and how vast this fire was. I challenge any borough in the whole country to have immediately had an action plan they could put into place.
So
They've
how
worked
do you
7
respond
days a
to
week.
what we just heard from Yvette Williams, that somebody has had rent taken from their bank account for Grenfell Tower?
I'm very sorry to hear that, and I can understand that's very distressing. But if you think that at the moment we've got...
But why is the council not on that sort of obvious thing?
Oh, come on. I mean, I'm not saying it's a tiny thing. For them, it's a huge thing, and it's very upsetting. But the council have had to house... they are in the process of trying to house 400 people. They've got people in hotels.
They were going to put me in a hotel very far out, not within RBKC. It was quite far. And I remember saying to them, this is my area, I need to be here, I don't know where my brother is. And they said I had to take whatever I was given. Yes. And I remember pleading, saying I need to be close. And it just happened to something, actually we've got one here. But there was no eye contact, there was no empathy, there was nothing. It was very cold.
Two named volunteers, Lubna and Hagar, reported that some of the housing staff were heard telling victims to fuck off. And then at the end, need more services to be compassionate.
Absolutely. I just don't understand the need for that. There was absolutely, we were all there, supposedly, trying to do the right thing and the only thing to support bereaved survivors and residents that presented to the Westway. It was absolutely uncalled for. It was the community that had organised themselves. It was the volunteers, the bereaved, the survivors.
I live 50 yards from the stop with my councillor daughter, and we are without my son in Chelsea. Nobody has contacted her or anybody. Obviously, I know everybody left. But Jeremy, thank you for coming. Everybody needs you here in this area. I can't even stand, but I'm standing for you.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Expressing your support for the community down here. Local clergy have been brilliant. Clergy from all over the area coming to
local mosque was on to me last night saying, what can we do to help?
People
came to the synagogue and said the same, people came to the church and said the same.
Yesterday morning, the groups were inundating the building on their way to the church.
And last time I looked, this was the richest borough in the country.
It is. It's the most polarised as well.
Oh, indeed. This is actually the poorest, one of the poorest parts in the whole of Britain.
It is. South Kensington and North Kensington are different worlds.
Thank you.
Everything very far. Strength of communities in diversity. That's it. Thank you for coming.
Theresa May did not meet any residents today, and the reason for that was cited as security concerns.
Because it's all the publicity stunt, and papers like the Telegraph and Daily Mail who supported her are going to show that she has some type of heart and soul, when she really doesn't. It's cold like a fish.
Why isn't she down here comforting people? Yeah, you went and saw some firemen and they're talking about security risk. Security risk, she's a disgrace.
Speaking to members of the emergency services and to local volunteers who, of course, have been praised by so many for all the time and effort that they've put in.
As council leader, I have to accept my share of responsibility for these perceived failings. I have therefore decided to step down as leader of the council as soon as a successor is in place.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
They must have thought that, okay, maybe because we're gonna demolish this building at one point, this estate at one point, we need to invest in it. So because they haven't invested in it, they were playing with people's lives, they were risking it. You can't play with people's lives, and look what's just happened. When are they gonna learn that you can't put money before people? It doesn't work that way. You can't put plastic around the building and lie to people say, oh, we've invested this much. What the hell is wrong with you?
They will not silence us. This was manslaughter, and everyone knows. Thank you.
For a big building like that, a lot should have been done. A lot should have been done to save their lives. But yeah, right now anyway, we're trying to get justice. Thank you.
You're all a bunch of lying. You've elected somebody who said that we will listen, but we won't hear.
Listen to their folks. They don't want you. They want Emma. Yes. They want Jeremy. Doesn't want you. My wife doesn't want you. The dead doesn't want you.
You need to listen to us, and you need to feel what we are feeling, because there is... All right. So, We're being treated as cattle right now, okay?
The wounds that have been created in North Kensington are not going to heal as long as you are ignorant enough to believe that you have a right to rule over us.
We were left exposed and vulnerable. And when the authorities eventually did come, it felt like a tick box exercise. We were treated like numbers, not humans. This is something that we still feel today. I cannot help but feel that had our community lived in a different part of the borough, on the more affluent side, had we been from a different class, had we been less ethnic, the response in the aftermath would have been immediate. It would have been present, it would have been felt. We may be different, we may be diverse, but we are people.
My sister was beautiful, an ambitious, talented young woman who wanted to succeed in her marketing career and start a family. She had fallen in love and had so much to look forward to. In the year before she passed away, she climbed an active volcano, she went abseiling, joined her friends on a small plane across the Caribbean, plus cycled and jet skied around Mexico. We went paragliding together with friends once in Spain, and of course she went first. She loved adventures, and she lived for the moment. She started fading away from me, rather rapidly, but she kept going all the way until she was no longer audible. She started to mumble, started banging the floor, and then finally no longer responsive. It was at this point I presumed that I'd lost my mum at the same time. But then about 20 seconds later, for the first time that early morning, I heard my mum's voice. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. That was the last time I heard her voice. I remained on the phone, and all I could hear shortly afterwards was the crackling of the fire penetrating the windows. Fire. Violent fire, strong enough to shift the kitchen equipment, while I was outside listening and looking up helplessly. My mum and my sister were murdered.
Yasin was always a supportive figure in the lives of his young cousins like me and those in the community. He was a sociable and popular person. He would always help neighbours with their bags and open doors. I felt inspired by his drive to create a better life for him and his family.
This is what one of our teachers, Miss Hurst, had to say about Nur Huda. Nur Huda had empathy well beyond her years. She looked out for other people and made sure that they were okay without expecting the same in return. Her inherent sense of right, wrong and justice stood her in good state and was instilled by her family. It is a tragedy that someone of her worth, value and quantity did not live to achieve the things she had planned.
Mehdi liked ice cream, curry and couscous. He kept a squishy red, white and blue rocket toy in his bed. Had he lived until adulthood, I think he would have liked to have been a comedian, although I do think he had some work to do on his jokes. Mehdi's class teacher, Miss Chabelsi, had this to say about my cousin. Mehdi was a much-loved and beautiful member of our class. He was friendly to all around him, always supportive and welcomed everybody no matter what. One of his strongest qualities was his ability to make us laugh and smile.
Our beloved brother Abdulaziz was a son, a father, a brother, an uncle, and a great uncle, and a dearest friend. He was kind, loyal family man. He had an infectious and caring personality. He left a mark on many people's hearts, and it's evident by the endless love and support given to us by his friends and colleagues.
Fawzia was very much loved in the community. She attended various classes at the Westway Trust Community Centre, as well as local knitting and crochet classes. She regularly attended her children's school trips, as well as supporting other classes that needed an extra pair of hands. That was Fawzia. She offered her time and support to all. The last project I remember Fawzia doing was making scarves, headbands, and even clothes for babies. All of these items were sold on Portobello Market, and the profits went back into the community. Our sister-in-law Fawzia was the anchor of her family. She had a real presence within the community, and she was loved by many. She was our family. She was our sister, and she will always be remembered for her strength, her kindness, and her love for others. We miss her dearly.
None of the counselling I receive can ever repair what has already been done. I have to live with my family ripped apart for the rest of my life. I don't see this as a tragedy. I see it as an atrocity.
I pay tribute to the courage and devotion to duty shown by firefighters who repeatedly entered the building to rescue occupants at great risk to themselves. However, I'm critical of many aspects of the NFB's response. Those who are liable to be called upon to act as incident commanders were not trained to recognize a fire in the external wall of a high-rise building, nor were they trained in how to respond to it. There was no contingency plan for evacuation of the tower, and the NFB failed to revoke the stay put advice at a time when the stairs remained passable. Had it done so, more lives could have been saved.
The stay put policy was seen to fail at 1:23 a.m. It was only changed to evacuation at 2:37. So at that point, when it changed to evacuation at 2:37, there were 107 people still inside the building, and only 36 of them survived.
This risk was on LFB's radar 9 months before the Grenfell Tower fire. Do you accept that?
As with a number of other risks, yeah, except that people were aware of that.
But she insisted training would have made no difference.
In the same manner that I wouldn't develop a training package for a space shuttle to land on the Shard, you know, we would respond to it and deal with it in the same professional manner we do.
Finally, Ms. Cotton was asked if she would have done anything differently.
I wouldn't change anything we did on the night. I think, without exception, my firefighters, my officers and my control staff performed in a fantastic way, given the incredible circumstances they were faced against.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Juliet. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good, good. How can I help?
I was wondering if you could keep our fire station open.
How old are you, Juliet?
I'm 9.
The 9-year-old girl would like a fire station.
Well, I understand, and you can't have a more sort of heartbreaking plea than that, can you? But
£100 million cut from the fire services, over 10 fire stations cut, over 29 fire engines lost, you know, and people went into the building with walkie-talkies that were not working.
How can cutting fire stations, cutting fire engines, cutting firefighters' posts not be a reduction in fire cover?
because we're improving fire cover, as I've said several times. And it's
You
not
lied.
about
You lied to the people of London in your election.
get stuck.
This policy of austerity affecting public service, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that it affected the ability of the fire service to respond to such an unprecedented event.
The architectural crown, a decorative feature introduced as part of the refurbishment, played a significant role in enabling the fire to spread around the building.
The crown on top of the building, which had the archonic PE Renabond on it, meant that once the fire had spread upwards, it spread to the side and spread around the building. Now, this was something that the Metropolitan Police in the helicopter became aware of before the fire service and did not inform the fire service of. So it's really in this way that we see the cladding as it was on the building caused it to rise up. But then the crown on top of the building, which again is explicitly there just for aesthetic purposes, caused it to go around the side of the building. Had it not gone around the side of the building, then that policy of stay put on at least one side of the building may have meant the people on the other side of the building survived. Because that was part of the understanding, is that if the fire wasn't on your side of the building, there's no way it's going to spread around to the other side. So you should be okay. But unfortunately, that's not what happened.
I begin with the fire itself. First, its cause and origin, which I find was an electrical fault in the large fridge freezer in the kitchen of flat 16. I make it clear that it occurred without any fault on the part of the tenant, Mr. Kabidi. I find that the principal reason why the fire developed so fiercely was the presence of aluminium composite rain screen panels containing a polyethylene core, which is highly combustible. But the insulation boards and other combustible materials also made a contribution.
Celotex is a world-leading provider of PIR thermal insulation, offering solutions for the new build and refurbishment applications for both the commercial and domestic sectors. Our vision is to be the most respected name in insulation.
I thought Celotex was a good company. I thought Celotex prided itself on doing the right thing, being honest. And I was really shocked by this.
You say do this, do what?
Well, it appeared to me that Celotex had taken some materials and installed them to pass the test.
That occurred to you at the time, did it?
Yes.
The rig was being over-engineered to achieve a pass.
Did that not strike you at the time as dishonest?
Yes, it did, yeah.
But you went along with it?
I went along with a lot of actions at Celotex that, looking back on reflection, were completely unethical, and one that I probably didn't potentially consider the impact of at the time.
Did you realise at the time that if this was how the test was to be described to the market, it would be a fraud on the market?
Yes, yeah, I did. I felt incredibly uncomfortable with it. I recall going home that evening. I still lived with my parents at the time, and mentioned that to them, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable with what I was being asked to do.
Was there nobody in Celotex you could have gone to and shared those concerns with?
All of the senior management were in that meeting.
In fact, it's correct, isn't it, that RS 5000 was not suitable for buildings over 18 metres unless it formed part of the exact system tested under BR 135. Correct. And therefore, do you accept that those words at the top of those pages in the banner were apt to lead the reader to think that Celotex RS 5000 was suitable for use in all buildings over 18 metres in height?
That would be the case, could be the case, yes.
Again, a thoroughly misleading wording. Do you accept that?
Yeah, it's not accurate.
It's misleading.
It could be construed as misleading, yes.
But it is misleading because it doesn't contain the caveat.
Yes.
Thank you.
When I learnt this information, I was about 3 or 4 weeks into my new post. I didn't know what to do with it, if I'm honest with you. In hindsight, there are a number of things I wish I had done a lot differently.
Purchase orders show that due to supply issues with Celotex RS 5000, 276 metres squared of a Kingspan product, Cooltherm K15 rain screen board of 80mm thickness was ordered as a substitute.
By 17 minutes, the top fire barrier had breached and the raging inferno moved up to the top thermocouples. BRE had to extinguish the test early because it was endangering setting fire to the laboratory. We can see that you're clearly concerned about the way the phenolic burned. Did Philip Heath and Malcolm Rochford share your concern about the fire performance of the new technology K15 at this time?
Like I say, I think this might have been the time that I was criticised for not being very positive about our products, or sorry, the Kingspan products.
On the basis of that 2005 test, Kingspan continued to assert for many years that its product could be used on buildings over 18 metres, didn't it?
Yes.
And as a result, K15 ended up on many hundreds of high-rise buildings, didn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Did it not occur to you that by permitting the 2005 test to remain out there, unwithdrawn for people to rely on, you were placing the safety of occupants of buildings with K15 on them at serious risk?
No.
Once the Grenfell Tower fire had happened, were you not concerned from June 2017 that customers were still buying K15 on the basis which was a test done on a different product?
No, because I didn't expect that there was any difference in the fire performance.
Do you accept that a culture of lying about the safety, fire safety of products is particularly serious because you're taking risks with people's lives and the safety of their homes?
No, I don't believe that we are lying. I think that I can't explain why they're describing it as such in that way between the two of them.
I've raised my concerns on numerous occasions about this kind of thing, so, you know, you get to a point where, you know, you get embroiled in the culture of a business, and it just becomes second nature, I think.
And how would you describe that culture at Kingspan?
They were assertive, going after sales.
And were they assertive at going after sales, even in the face of life safety problems with their product?
I think looking at the information and the evidence now, yes.
To dream is to imagine the impossible.
Arconic was the manufacturer and the seller of the rain screen panels that were installed as the cladding on Grenfell Tower. The inquiry's position is that the refusal of these witnesses to come and give evidence is unreasonable. Do you accept that test 5B was Arconic's deadly secret?
No. The test shows that the product is flammable, but not necessarily dangerous.
Right. And what European country would allow Brainebon 55 PE in cassette variant, which had tested and shown those test results to be used above 18 metres?
The countries whose legislation, which is still operational, accepts that product.
And in fact, do you accept that if the Grenfell Tower fire had never happened, nobody would ever have known about the failed test 5B?
Oui.
These companies knew their materials were dangerous to life. They knew their materials would burn with lethal speed, and yet they marketed their products into an uncaring and under-regulated building industry which spread them around residential buildings like a disease.
Amal was the most caring and loving person you could ever meet. Her capacity to love was unmatchable. She didn't care who you were, where you were from, your religion, or whatever walk of life you came from. She would give you the shirt off her back to help you. She loved to have a good time and laugh and surround herself with positive, amazing people. She never judged anybody or placed ridiculous expectations on you. We grew up sharing a room together, and whenever I had nightmares as a kid, she would hold me so tight and squeeze out the nightmares. Growing up, she taught me how precious life was and the importance of the kind of people you surround yourself with. Amal was an incredible mother. Motherhood brought out a layer of her personality that we were all in awe of. When we found out that Amal was pregnant with Amaya, the amount of joy that filled the whole family was unexplainable. We had all burst into tears, realizing the incredible, priceless gift we were about to receive. She was the first baby of the family. I saw her take her first breath, and I named her Amaya. She was so beautiful. I had planned her whole life in that moment. Amaya was an angel and the sweetest little girl. She loved her parents, Amal and Muhammad Noor. They were such loving parents to her. Muhammad Noor was such an amazing person. Amaya's laugh was infectious. Her whole body would shake and she would jump up and down. She would run around and would want to play with anybody, young or old. She was so smart and a bit cheeky, and we all realized pretty early on that she was definitely her mother's daughter. We celebrated her 3rd birthday February last year, and you can see her personality forming more and more, and we would get so excited by what an amazing human being she was going to grow up to be. Whenever I would take her to sleep, she would lay so close and rub and scratch your neck, as that was the only thing that soothed her to sleep. I would hold her tight, just like Amal did to me as a kid. And that's how they were when they were being burnt alive, holding each other so tight, trying to squeeze the nightmare away. Till this day, and for the rest of my life, I will never accept that they are gone, and that I will never see them again, and I will never be able to feel their warmth, their kind and loving hearts. I will continue planning Amaya's life, what she would be doing today, tomorrow, her 10th birthday, her 18th, her 21st, and the rest of her life. We all miss them so much.
Now, this is a document called Kingspan Political Engagement Plan, and there is a list of readily familiar names. Sajid Javid, Amber Rudd, Michael Gove. And we can see from this document the efforts that have been made to contact MPs and stakeholders by telephone, email, letter, and then follow-ups to get meetings. The impression one gets from this document is that this was a pretty carefully orchestrated campaign.
Yes.
across a wide front with a number of extremely powerful and important stakeholders.
Yes.
Our first priority is safety. We are deeply saddened by the terrible tragedy of Grenfell. Our position is not about commercial benefit, but about ensuring that building regulations are always rooted in science and engineering. We don't see anywhere in this letter, or indeed in any of the underlying material, where Mr. Burnley or anybody else at Kingspan tells the Select Committee that the test was designed to perform poorly, do we?
No.
We don't see anywhere where they are told that it was set up to fail or a worst-case scenario, do we?
No.
Now, we've seen Mr. Murtagh was on the April emails about setting the test up to fail or setting it up to perform poorly. To your knowledge, did Mr. Murtagh or anybody else ever write back to the department or to Clive Betts asking them to ignore the 2nd of July 2018 Dubai test?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you see the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire as something of a commercial opportunity?
Absolutely not.
And the reality, Mr. Pargeter, is that Kingspan's position, even in 2018, in the face of a government investigation into fire safety after Grenfell, was doing its best to ensure that the science was secretly perverted for financial gain. That is the position, isn't it?
That's not the position at all, no.
And that had been your own approach and Kingspan's general approach for years.
I disagree.
And it's still going on.
No, disagree.
Make our homes safe. Remove the cladding now.
This is a protest outside a sales event of Bellway Homes, the builders of a block of flats that was engulfed by fire in June.
I lost everything. The fact that we obviously had Grenfell. Action must be taken now before somebody else does die, and there needs to be a retroactive ban that takes place on the use of these flammable materials.
150 people have been evacuated from a retirement home in Cheshire. That's after a major fire. 16 fire engines tackled the blaze in Crewe yesterday afternoon.
Eyewitnesses described flames crawling up the side of the 6-storey building known as the Cube, a privately owned block home to 100 students from the University of Bolton.
I'm from Manchester.
I live in Birmingham.
My flat is in Balham.
Faces of the building safety scandal. People who live in fear their home could be the next Grenfell.
We live in a 1-bedroom apartment. We were hoping that that would, put us on the ladder to move on then to something a little bit bigger where we might have the opportunity to have a family, and that's completely stalled all of that.
And they're not alone. This afternoon, building safety victims united together for a protest outside Parliament.
Understand the pain and suffering that we are going through.
The report that came from the LFB said we were minutes away from tragedy. And to this day, the children that were caught in the fire are still traumatised and can't sleep alone. So, yes, we're very fortunate that the outcome of the fire is that our developer has agreed to pay, but it's a very dangerous precedent to set, and we wouldn't wish the same on anyone else.
Over my life, I've been on many marches and many demonstrations, but I've never been on anything that's so poignant and so powerful as thousands and thousands and thousands of people just silently walking through North Kensington and then walking past the carcass, which is Grenfell Tower. All those responsible for this avoidable tragedy must understand that justice must prevail, and every necessary measure must be put in place to prevent a fire like Grenfell ever happening again.
This tragedy was not an accident in any meaningful sense. It was the product of a philosophy that says some lives have value and others do not. A product of a philosophy that says that people that live in social housing apparently should not even be able to sleep safely in their beds. A product of a philosophy of malign neglect. A product of a philosophy that suddenly has a magic money tree whenever it's time to bomb some country somewhere around the world, but does not have basic money for people living in social housing on their own doorsteps. It was a product of a philosophy that tries to cut every single corner available down here, but can find £18.5 million for the pavement outside Exhibition Road just up there. It was a product of a philosophy that in the days after all these people lost their lives, decided to demonize the people living here in the press rather than hold the people accountable, responsible. That's the kind of free press we have in this country. We all know that people should be arrested. We all know that if this happened a mile in that direction, and it was the fault of a plumber or an electrician from around here, he would have been in prison on July the 18th, 2017. June, rather.
So I ask you all here, and everyone watching, when you go home tonight, hug your loved ones. Cherish every moment with them. Because until those in power listen and make changes to a system that failed, until then, only God knows how many homes are safe in this country. Only you, those in power, can make that change.
For innocence tarnished and beauty that was lost, regulations disregarded, it's the humans that's the cost. Hospitals, hotels and schools, how can we forget that? Up and down the country, there's people sleeping in death traps. We're calling for an end to the disdain. Better bow your heads in silence when we're mentioning their names. We're calling for survivors rehoused in the best place, but still we demonstrate against bonfires of red tape. We're calling for the companies and council held accountable, climbing up the mountain, though its height seems insurmountable. We're calling from the bottom of our lungs, truth, justice and peace for all of the lost ones. We will not betray the dead, because betrayal of them is a betrayal of the living. Thank you very much.